Good afternoon. My name is Liam Lonegan, like I said earlier, and I'm an artistic associate here at the Westport Country Playhouse. I'm pleased to welcome you to our discussion today, which is titled The Ivory Trade in Connecticut and Beyond, which is part of our Malima's Tale Discovery Series, which is a cycle of special programming made possible through a grant from the Connecticut Humanities, which includes a photography exhibit upstairs, a screening of a documentary that you attended, right, Ken, did you say? At the library, as well as a blog series that's on our website and other programs. I'm joined today by a pretty impressive group of individuals, panelists who have been eager to speak with you and each other. The topics surrounding the play are issues that not only do they have specific expertise in, but are also pretty passionate about, which I've gotten to see just in our email exchanges and then today at lunch. On my right is Ken Bernhard, who's a principal at our beloved Cohen and Wolf. Cohen and Wolf is our longest corporate sponsor at the Playhouse. So yes, and over the past 45 years, he's developed a broad practice representing individuals and corporations in litigation cases, criminal and civil, real estate matters, and commercial interests. He served as a town attorney for Westport, Weston, and Wilton, and serves on the board of directors for numerous organizations. Some of the most notable include the Westport Public Library, the Westport Weston Chamber of Commerce, Aspect Land Trust, Fidelco Guide Dog Foundation, and the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. Wow, look at that. But most importantly, he has spent many years advocating for the protection of African wildlife from illegal trafficking, which is the main reason why he's here today. And next to him is Priscilla Farrell, president of Friends of Animals since 1987, but has worked there since 1974. Which I learned today, which holds headquarters in Darien. Friends of Animals is an internationally recognized nonprofit animal advocacy organization, which brings deep focus into issues like critical habitat, wildlife protection, veganism, environmental and animal rights issues. She's also the president of the San Antonio Sanctuary, primarily primates, and has been since 2007. And along with being an animal organizer and advocate, Priscilla is also a food activist and has authored 3 vegan cookbooks. Her work has been featured in various notable outlets and publications, including the New York Times, Politico, and CBS 60 Minutes. And next to Priscilla is David Michel, who's our Connecticut state representative for the 146th House District. Originally from France, Representative Michel moved to the U.S. when he was 14 years old and has lived on Long Island Sound ever since, which sparked a passion for the environment. In recent years, he's joined efforts on various environmental and animal rights projects, which he'll talk about, and serves on the State Environment Committee, Planning and Development Committee, and Public Health Committee, and also is the House Democratic Chair for the Legislators of Animal Advocacy Caucus. Can everyone give them a round of applause, please? Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to talk a lot less now. But I would love to pass the mic down and have each of you talk just a little bit about how you got first introduced to this idea of animal advocacy in whatever way you'd like to. I'll start with you, Ken.
Well, I've been an animal advocate, I think, my entire life. We all have an opportunity to touch our emotional selves and find out what's there. And for me, it's always been to advocate on behalf of animals, mostly because I find it abhorrent. Gratuitous cruelty is just something I can't quite tolerate. It gets a visceral reaction from me. So it was a natural path for me to get involved in efforts to protect wildlife from exactly that gratuitous cruelty. And I've been doing it since I was a child. I've had the opportunity to serve actually as chairman of the board for Friends of Animals with Priscilla at some time years ago, and then I've been active with the International Fund for Animal Welfare. And in both of those roles, I've had the opportunity to go to Africa about 7 or 8 times at this point to work closely with the Kenyan Wildlife Service on various projects. I went actually with Priscilla on an occasion. We went to Liberia where Friends of Animals was endeavoring to establish an animal orphanage in the country. You know, what do you do when you capture animals that have been confiscated from the wild at the airport? You can't return them to the to the wildlife where they came from, so you have to have a facility, and Friends of Animals was endeavoring to set up a project there. Unfortunately, Sergeant Doe took over and created a revolt, and therefore our project was abandoned, which is not antithetical to what happens often in Africa. You make a good start and then something comes up that turns things around. But you persevere, and I'd like to think that's what I've been doing constantly, and I'm still in touch with various wildlife groups, and in fact I hope to be going back to Senegal in January on another project. Anyway, there you go, Priscilla.
I somehow can't talk without saying that my first stuffed animal was an elephant. And I ended up bringing it to college with me years later. It's to say that animals have always captured my imagination and a sense of wonder. And as a feminist, finding my own voice, I thought they needed defending because they were voiceless. In 1972, when I was buying pet food, cat food, in Westport, I turned the can around, Calcan cat food, and found whale meat in it. And it was illegal to have whale meat and cat food that year. So I contacted Friends of Animals. I was a member. And they said, we're going to go to the Department of Commerce. Thank you for telling us. Somehow I found myself on the front lines with that call. And I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be involved with controversy. I want to defend animals that need to be defended. And I want to figure out what the wrongs are and try to encourage the rights. And I found my way into the door when there was a job opening in New York City in 1974, and I commuted from Westport. It was a 5-hour commute a day, back and forward, and I found a purpose there. I found what I believed in deeply in ways that I could act on it. And eventually, when the founder of Friends of Animals retired, I was asked to take over, and that was never an ambition for me. It was something, an opportunity. And I've stayed this many years because it gives my life purpose, and because I think much of what I do there helps change the world, sometimes just a little bit. Sometimes it's the possibility of change that's worth it. So I do have a steady appetite of issues that are stressful, but I think that in balance, it's offered me most everything.
First, I want to say that what an amazing performance tonight, and it takes a little while to recover and then pop up here when these amazing actors were just here, especially the elephant spirit. Probably will be dreaming about the elephant spirit tonight. But I moved here when I was 14, and you probably can hear my French accent. I can't get rid of it. But I always had a sensitivity for wildlife and for nature and for animals. But there was something missing. And later on, and then I'm a big gap, but later on in my life in 2013, well, first I was really interested in what these anti-poaching vessels were doing in Antarctica, stopping whale poaching and such things. And then I was like, I need to get involved with these people. They seem to have a missing piece of my puzzle. And I went on a campaign. I couldn't spend months on a ship, so I went to a land campaign, which was in Taiji, Japan, in Taiji, Wakayama Prefecture, which is the Cove, and where I documented dolphin slaughters that was sponsored by the aquarium industry. And I think a few months later, it really was troubling to me that I would see dolphins in sort of a very different way, and just like maybe I see cows and other animals. I know it sounds weird. On my Facebook page, on the cover picture, you see a dolphins and a cow jumping out of the water, and people are like, what is this picture about? I was like, well, it's because I reconnected, I think, something that was missing. And And I decided to go vegan at that moment. And I said, what am I going to do with cheese? Since I'm French and I love cheese. But guess what? I found amazing vegan cheeses. And so my life was certainly not changed for the worse, but just for the better. And I felt also much better about my involvement in what I buy every day on a daily basis. And as you can see, I'm in good shape. I'm not missing anything. So this was kind of a startup. And then I said, after Japan, how do I pursue this form of activism at home? And then in Stanford, we had many environmental issues, stormwater issues, all kinds of pollution going from the land to the water. And so I got involved in that, documented it just like I documented the dolphin slaughters, and sent really obnoxious emails, just like a Frenchman could do. I sent these obnoxious emails to the mayor and to the DEEP, and then I was like, no response, no response. The EPA, and then suddenly things trickle down, and then suddenly people are responding because there's way too many people in my emails. So, and that led on to making kind of an interesting image of myself in Stanford, and that actually really led me into politics, which I never thought I would be in politics. And so I'm trying to bring some maybe bolder or maybe just updated subjects, participating in a different manner than your typical maybe legislator at the House. And so I'm in 3 committees that have something to do with the environment, but as well as public health, because they're always linked, which is environment, public health, and planning and development.
Okay, we'll pass this one. Both of you have mentioned veganism, which I think is just something that's obviously very tangible to us. We are either vegans or we have friends or family that are. And just can you talk a little bit about how that has influenced the way or you see human interaction with non-human animals or your work at all?
It should really be an easy question to answer, and it's not. And this sounds simplified, but I don't eat my friends, and animals are my friends. And the truth is, I've seen the slaughterhouses, and I've heard the noise from it all, and I know the industry inside out. I've spent enough years studying it that I know it. And I think that we're so privileged in North America that we have such an abundance of plant-based food we can eat. I'm a very good cook, so I like cooking. I like preparing food. I think offering food is an offering of love. So for me, it's a compelling idea that I think keeps me healthy, keeps my conscience clean, and my body is not a grave for what I despair over.
And so for me, it really clicked when I was in Taiji, where, after a couple of days of being there, and in campaign, when you're protecting animals with certain NGOs, they'll say, well, since we're protecting animals, just for a couple of weeks, you'll just eat plant-based. And so I was like, okay, fine. But eventually, and I'm talking about something I'm not proud about, but this is the transition, where I felt like something is wrong, I'm feeling dizzy or weak. Then I slipped out of the campaign and asked for my bifo. In Japanese, if you add an O, then they understand the English word. And so I said, she was like, bifo? I was like, no vegetarian? I was like, gosh. So I had my beef. I didn't feel good. I still felt dizzy and weak. And I found out later that there are elements in our foods that are addictive, and I was probably going through what I would describe as withdrawal. But this was when I made that connection, and I think, like Priscilla said it so well, we don't eat our friends, and if we really care for wildlife and diversity, just our animal agriculture participates in very negative. Coming out with French words, so I have to be careful. But animal agriculture is, for example, in the US, is a source of dead zones in the ocean, which is killing diversity in the oceans. And the oceans are protecting us from climate change.
I learned today that Ken actually spent some time in Kenya along with Priscilla, but can you talk a little bit about your anti-poaching endeavors there, which I think would be interesting to us? And actually take that microphone.
If I may, let me just back up a bit. First of all, thank you very much for staying after the play, and I think you're here because the play resonated with you. But just in the way of a little bit more background, what we're talking about here is the fourth largest criminal enterprise in the world, after guns, human trafficking, and drugs. It's a $23 billion industry. It's run by industrialized, commercial, sophisticated criminal enterprises. And what we witnessed here on the stage mostly was a smaller drama on the poaching component of it. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that really there is no poaching, there is no strip mining of African wildlife, which is really what's happening if there wasn't a market. It's the industrialized nations that provide the market for these offshoots of poaching. And so in preparing to come here tonight, or this afternoon, that just gave thought. It's so easy to point a finger at what's going on in Africa as the source of the pain that we're suffering when we saw this play and that we experienced and why you're staying afterwards. But we really have to look into our own hearts and how we conduct our own behavior here and in the industrialized world, because we provide the market. Most of the trophy hunters that go over to Africa are from the United States. There are more tigers in the United States than there are in the wild. The trinkets, the market for exotic birds and reptiles is in the industrialized nations. It's not in Africa. There isn't much of a market for the things that are the offshoot of this criminal enterprise in Africa itself. It's the industrialized nations that provide that market and the economic foundation for it. So anyway, just an admonition. I didn't want to leave this afternoon without making that point. Back to the question that was given to me. Given the opportunity to get active, I have been was given the opportunity to participate in a sting operation, for example. They needed an American tourist to pretend to be buying Africa, and I was wired, and the police were nearby. But to make the point I was just making a moment ago, the first person that was selling me ivory in Nairobi, and who was arrested, was a 60-year-old grandmother whose daughter had died of AIDS, and she had to raise her grandchildren, and she had no other source of income. And so while I went over with the idea of catching criminals and hardened people, I saw this grandmother being walked off in handcuffs, and I was really conflicted as to whether I'd really done a good deed that day. So that's one of a number of experiences I've had and opportunities I've been given to participate in trying to do something about the animal poaching in Africa.
One thing that Ken just brought up that I want to just mention about the piece is that I feel like it does kind of a brilliant and complicated job at displaying the large scope situation of complicity that each person, each character has in the industry, just like Ken is talking about, from someone that admits something that they shouldn't, or to the consumer, to the party guests, and that we all have a touch of complicity. That's why sort of the elephant touches each character. One thing that I learned just in researching for the play was this international conference that has a lot of influence over the environment and the way we protect our animals around the world. And Priscilla, could you just talk about CITES a little bit and just explain it for the people that don't know what it is?
Right. In the play, when they mention CITES, they're talking about a convention, a treaty, to which there are more than 100 nations party. The U.S., of course, is a party to CITES, all of Africa, Asia. In 1989, Friends of Animals drafted the proposal that was passed to ban the ivory trade. We went to that meeting in Kenya. It was a powerful meeting. Kenya burned their ivory there to show that what they valued was live elephants. And what they burned was worth millions of dollars. For several years after that, the ivory trade ban resulted in less poaching of animals, less poaching of elephants. But in 1997, when the meeting was held, it's held about every 3 years, it was held in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is in southern Africa. It's a problematic nation, not only for trophy hunting, but for poaching. And the meeting resulted in a secret ballot vote to downlist, meaning giving less protection to some elephants in 3 African nations, including Zimbabwe. The vote passed by a 2/3 majority, and no one could determine who had voted which way. At the time it passed, fists were thrown into the air, revolutionary songs broke out. We were in the upper balconies, and we were there as NGOs, and we knew we had to get out of Zimbabwe. And we ran to the airport and got the first plane out. And that, for me, was the beginning of the further demise of elephants, because recently they've been cut to about 352,000 animals, including about 30,000 forest elephants. At the time that we passed the ban in '89, there were twice that many. So whether or not there's a market really matters, and where the market thrived up until the end of 2017 was China. And what China did through public pressure was to shut down every retail store. They shut down every shop that manufactured ivory. They retooled. They made sure that government officials emptied their offices of statues and trinkets. And they also assured that government workers didn't do business with anyone that had ivory in their offices, in their homes. When China makes up its mind about something, if it's the right decision, they enforce it. The result of that is a reprieve for elephants, in that the poaching has probably been reduced since 2017, and we're going to have to wait to see the next censusing to know what the numbers really are. But I think there's optimism.
That's perfect segue, because obviously we see in the production that China is the destination for Malima's tusks, though that obviously wasn't always the case. We in Connecticut have a history with the ivory trade, and Connecticut, in Deep River and Essex, two major ivory processors there, were responsible for 90% of the imported ivory into the United States, which is a big deal, obviously. But I'd love for David to talk a little bit about where we are, or you feel like you are, in terms of your work in getting legislation passed, just for all of us that sort of don't know the updates.
Sure. So, in terms of legislation, we tried to pass a ban of the big 5 accessories, parts of these animals to be imported, sold, and traded here. It unfortunately did not become law, so we will continue to work on this. There are also other bills that we're working on to fight illegal either poaching activities, poachers throughout the world, and as well as illegal fisheries. And of course, we're going to introduce a bill against the ivory trade in Connecticut.
Thank you. I just have one sort of large question to go down the row with, but what can we do as citizens of New York or Connecticut, far away from Tsavo National Park, far away from Tanzania? What can we do here to sort of help prevent or help organizations or efforts that you guys have been a part of, after seeing today's production?
Well, I think Priscilla pointed out that public pressure matters. And I think to David's point, we need to pass the legislation. There are 4 states in the country at the moment that ban the importation and possession of ivory ban. The selling of any ivory. And we need to pass a similar law in Connecticut. We came very close. David was very instrumental and very powerful up in the legislature, but he's only been there for 1 term, so he's got to get some seniority and some clout, which he'll be able to do in the next session to get the bill taken up. It did pass the Senate. It didn't pass it wasn't called to the House. What else can you do? You can be more mindful of what you buy. How many of us have traveled? I suspect in the audience, everyone has probably traveled in many places around the world. You might be a little more careful about what you buy as a trinket or things that you bring home to make certain that you're not contributing inadvertently to the slaughter of animals unnecessarily. You can certainly, I would urge you not to buy or support anyone who seems to go to retailers that sell exotic animals that have no place being in our homes. They're not pets, and they shouldn't be bought and possessed by us. Unfortunately, as I indicated before, there are more tigers in the United States than there are in the wild. And so just be sensitive and speak up when you can of the fact that we're part of the problem and we can be part of the solution.
Trophy hunting actually fuels an illegal trade. So if you have trophy hunters among your friends or in your family, try to discourage this. Trophy hunters that have a permit to kill 1 elephant in Zimbabwe or South Africa or Botswana this year is offering 158 elephants to kill. That permit for 1 elephant or 1 lion means somebody is going out for 4 days or 18 days. They see an elephant with a magnificent set of tusks, and they shoot it. But 7 days later, they still have that permit. They see a bigger elephant. The tusks are more glorious than the last one, or the mane of the lion is more magnificent. So they shoot again. That's poaching. The first dead elephant is thrown away. The first dead lion is thrown away. The animal with the smaller horns is discarded. This is a crime. Clearly, it's a crime that they get away with. But if you're somebody that wants to make change and you want to go on an African safari, there are wonderful nations to visit, like Kenya, that has had no public hunting there since the 1970s. All of those national parks, Tsavo National Park there is the size of New Jersey, and that's a sanctuary for all wildlife. Visit a place that protects its wildlife and enforces that protection. I think that's the reward.
Can you just talk, Priscilla, a little bit about what Friends of Animals is sort of up to now, and if we can get involved or help out in any way?
Oh, we've had a long history of supplying equipment to African Rangers. That started in 1991 with lots of surplus military vehicles, many radios, GPS equipment, airplanes, parts for airplanes. This has shifted a bit for some sanctuary sponsorship in West Africa, where we're protecting primates, chimpanzees, and others. I think, we'd love, of course, to encourage people to be members in Friends of Animals, but the African wildlife work is varied, and I have a litigation office in Denver that is filing many, many appeals to stop the importation of elephant parts back into the United States. So we are on the front lines of that kind of litigation, and it's making a difference.
Just to supplement, if I may, David, the importance of equipment. I had an opportunity to go out on patrol in Senegal, and I'm all decked out in my LL Bean outfit, and the ranger with whom I was going to spend 10 days in the bush was walking with sandals, flip-flops really. Totally inadequate equipment to do the work they have to do. It's a war in protecting animals. The poachers are often drug-addicted teenagers who, at least in Kenya, have come over from Somalia. They do their damage, but their indifference to the cruelty and the crimes that they commit. When I was there on one occasion, 2 rangers were ambushed out in the field. They were on patrol. They found a rock in the road. They got out of their Jeep, and they were machine gunned down. In Northern Africa, the poachers came in riding on horsebacks with grenades and AK-47 and slaughtered 300 elephants on one occasion. I think this was about 2012. So equipment makes a difference. There is a concerted effort now in many of the countries that care to arm their rangers better. But I think if you are fortunate enough to see the documentary film that the library put on, they are still very much underfunded for doing the kind of work that they need to do. Sorry, David.
Oh, that's fine. I'm French and I like to talk, so. I was going to say, I'm just going to touch up equipment, again, is very important, and support for those organizations that help with material. For example, I've worked with an NGO that is also working with Senegal, with the Mexican government, and they're giving them Zodiacs and drones and camera equipment, GPS, all kinds of stuff. So it's very important. It's detrimental, sorry, I'm French, I mix up those 2 words. But it's whichever word, very important to achieve the good work. Now, what can we do here in Connecticut? So obviously legislation, it's one thing to have legislators trying to push for bills, but it's even better when people come and testify and participate in public hearings. It's very important. Sometimes there will be no one testifying for a bill. And the testimonies are super important because they actually help manage the bill, meaning change the bill and correct it. The bill gets introduced and it's changed 20 times before it comes onto the floor. So it's very important to hear your voices. Obviously, we cannot be a better voice without hearing you guys. So that's one important aspect. Another thing, and I like to use this just as a little example. I kept traveling. I was doing some undercover investigation about Lake Okeechobee, and so I kept going to landing in Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach Airport. And every time I landed there, or when I'm taking off coming back to New York, I'm looking at the accessories in the shop, and I'm looking at back scratches that are made of alligator paws, and they're small, so you're like, they can't have been an adult. And then so, as usual, the annoying French guy starts calling the company that is sending this to the shops. I'm calling the shops and saying, why are you selling this product? It's awful. And you're going to have a lot of activists calling you and emailing you. Which did happen. And eventually, I pushed so much, they retrieved those products. I found out that the company was, it was a fake phone number on the tags. It was all kinds of stuff. So, and this alligator farm was basically just growing them to not even adult size because it would be too much food and too much money to care for them. So they would chop and sell the heads and really honestly, when you see stuff like that, it's great to talk about it and show your outrage. It's perfectly fine. It's actually humane to show your outrage. So there's things you can do at home when you travel, but one thing is we do need help in legislation and putting pressure on not only the chairs of the committees. A bill doesn't get called on the floor if the majority leader and Speaker of the House don't agree with it, or the chairs of that committee. So we need help. Sometimes the legislators or state senators or state reps are offering or introducing really good bills, but sometimes there's companies in other districts that would be touched by that and that fight it until their own legislator, and it could be the majority leader, it could be the Speaker of the House. But importantly enough, it's the leadership and the chairman that are the ultimate deciders, and it's very important that they hear from you if you're outraged about something.
Great. I would like to give you a chance to ask any questions, if you'd like. So, show of hands. Okay, that woman in the middle. Okay, great. Awesome. And it'd be great if you could address someone specific on the panel or specifically open it up to all three. But
I'd like to open it up to all three, or all four, or all of us here. How do we change the minds of a dentist that kills a beautiful, magnificent lion? They killed Cecil many years ago. How do we change the minds of trophy hunters? We can do our legislation, but how do we get to that innate need for trophies of our beautiful resources?
How do you change minds? I think that you have to inspire somebody to change. I don't think we can lecture and sermon and motivate. I think you have to inspire. And that means, and I tell this to the people in my community, you just can't talk to your choir. You just can't talk to people you agree with. You have to dare to leave your comfort zone and have conversations with somebody else.
I'll second that. You can't impose on anyone. That you're not going to change anyone by imposing. But education, sometimes I've been called extremist because of my environmentalist views on the oceans. And I said, I'm really not an extremist. I'm just educated, but I'm more than happy to share information. And sometimes it will happen that certain information was not transmitted. And sometimes education can actually change the minds. But
I would just echo that. You can't guilt people to change their minds. What you have to do is educate. And with education, like in most endeavors, really comes change. So your mission, if you want to assume one, is when you go about your lives, you speak up and educate. Maybe you've learned a few facts here that would be helpful. I'd be glad to make other resources available to you, even talking points if you'd like, so that when you have a conversation with your friends or you're out traveling and you see things, speak up and educate.
And what's crazy is that the facts are actually pretty shocking, and the amount of miseducation or uneducation. I mean, you guys saw, yes, one second. In the Ivory shop in Beijing, the shopkeeper was saying how they fall out like teeth and that they grow back on an elephant, which is completely untrue. Every single tusk is connected to a dead elephant. They do not live through the removal of a tusk. So just education. Yes.
I just have a quick comment and a question. I can't believe what's going on in the state of Connecticut, and I'd like to know if this bill that was mentioned was the Senate, pending in the Senate or the House, and I'd like to know the number of the bill.
so that was a SB, so Senate Bill 20. So
2020?
Yep, 20. So when you go to the CGA website, it's very important, by the way, to know how to navigate that website so that you don't read the...
Involved in bills and not in the,
Yep.
in House or the Senate, but I'll see what contacts I can make.
Thank you.
What does the role of zoos play? What do zoos? That might
Zoos.
Be,
Okay.
we might be here for hours.
Yeah. Well,
And I'm going to give it, I'm only going to take it from him because at the last CITES meeting, 2019, there was a wonderful vote. And the vote now prohibits the transport of elephants to any United States zoo. That is an incredibly important decision at CITES. And there was a New York Times Magazine story about zoos taking elephants from Swaziland. We were involved in a lawsuit trying to stop that. But I think the education, again, reached enough delegations that that vote went through. The zoos keep elephants in a captive situation where they really don't thrive. They often aren't able to breed. You know, when your normal conduct is to walk miles a day, no zoo has a facility where you can meet the needs of families of elephants. They're matriarchal, they're very sociable. It can't reflect what they need in the wild. They shouldn't be in captivity, and they should never be in a zoo.
yeah. I'm more experienced with the aquarium industry, but we're basically talking about something very similar. I've had my own run-ins in Connecticut with the Mystic Aquarium. They're getting 5 more belugas to continue do more research in a bathtub. So you're a marine mammal or you're an elephant. You participate, by the way, something very important. Elephants are keystone species. So I have a problem with that word. They're always ultimately important for the entire ecosystem. They are on top. They're not an apex predator. They are a keystone, which means that the ecology is highly dependent on those species. So just like marine mammals, for example. And I really don't believe that any animals in captivity are any show of education. It's not education to have an animal that normally runs in the wild. There's ecotours, there's ecotourism. You could go on a boat and see marine life in the ocean. It's more educational than being in a bathtub where they're just stuck there instead of swimming tens to hundreds of miles a day. And same thing with the elephants. The elephants are needed for the soil and for the whole ecology of the forest. The whales are gardeners of the seas and they maintain the phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton is what does 3 main things, which is I'm just explaining this because in relation to keystone species, the phytoplankton, 1, absorbs the CO2. 2, feeds the zooplankton, which is the baby crustaceans and baby fish. And then 3, it produces 70% of the oxygen in the air we breathe. So as we continue losing whales for multiple reasons, we have to be careful, for example, not to increase the factors that are pushing these species to extinction. Just like the elephants, just like the bees, they are really important for our own existence.
Would you mind talking a little bit about the information you share with us about how, about the way elephants support the ecological?
In defining a keystone creature, elephants are critical in terms of tramping down vegetation as they go on their journeys. When they trample down the grasses and so forth, they make an environment for other creatures to live in. They're also critical because they wander. Their dung, when they drop it, is full of seeds, and that brings back new life to vegetation. When in the dry season, they have an incredible ability to seek out water, and they dig water holes with their tusks, which obviously gives them water, but it also provides water for other creatures. So they are critical to the entire environment of sustaining life. Where in their habitat. But to go back to your question about zoos, I think, we've all been to the zoos, and there is a certain amount of education, I suppose, or at least some education going, and so I wouldn't want to disparage zoos, but on the other hand, I think their time has come, and it's on its way out. I think as we're getting educated, we see the pain and suffering that we impose on the creatures, and it's very hard to enjoy yourself. When I can remember when I go into the Bronx Zoo and seeing a tiger walk back and forth in a concrete cage, and even as a small child, that just didn't seem right to me. It was obviously going mad in that confinement. So I don't think there's the same joy that we older folks may have gotten in attending zoos. And we have nature films now. It's not as if we need to go to the zoo to get the information that's imparted there. With the nature films and so forth, we have access to their habitat, what they're like, what they look like, and so forth. So I think it's a business that can go out of business, and hopefully will in some short order, particularly for the creatures that have no business being there and are being tortured in the process of it.
Yeah, regarding zoos and aquariums again, we have a zoo in our state, Comerford Zoo. And I'm sure you guys came here to see a play about elephant poaching. Well, there were 3 elephants in that zoo that suddenly happened to actually be only 1 left. Beulah passed away in the Big E in front of the public. I don't know if you can imagine. I've told people this probably was the best way for the elephant to pass away, in front of the public, in the public eye, to shed the light on this, exhausted, and with these human creatures all around the elephant looking at it just die. No privacy, just dying, resting in grass, on this Connecticut grass, an elephant. And you know, we have issues here in the state with, it's not only the legislature, it's also DUAG and the DEEP. The DEEP is not an enforcer. DUAG doesn't follow up with animal rights issues. The USDA tells legislators, FOIA us if you want to have the necropsy of the elephant that died at the Big E. Then nothing is really friendly right now. It's not that friendly, and I'm sorry to bring the bad news. I don't mean to, like, on top of this heavy story, but there's a lot of things we need to change in the state. And the Comerford Zoo, I'm organizing a press conference on the 22nd at the Capitol regarding Minnie the elephant. Hopefully, she won't be moved to another horrible place in Florida, because the zoo is now trying to get rid of Minnie. There's 2 sanctuaries that said they will take her at no cost. But no, Comerford Zoo doesn't want to go there, wants to keep his elephant and sell it to, if I say Florida, you probably imagine there's no good, or in my mind there's no good zoos or no good aquariums, but in Florida and in the South generally, the animal rights are even more dismissed. So I'm just pointing that out. This is very important that as a state we organize and to get rid of these nasty businesses. And I'm sorry, this is my point of view, and I'm no light with my words. It's very French as well.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? Yes, over here.
Oh, well, I was going to say I'm inundated with environmental organizations asking for contributions. Which of the environmental organizations is most concerned about animals?
I'm not certain I can answer that question because the environment, you heard that I'm involved with an organization called the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. We're a lobbyist organization. We're the ones who meet with people like David and advise them of the good environmental bills and tell them about the bad environmental bills. We tell them that we're going to be watching their scores, and we produce a scorecard. Animals are definitely within the ambiance of environmental issues.
What's the name of that organization?
It's called the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters. There's the League of Conservation Voters, which is the most influential national organization, but as we've all come to learn recently, we can't rely on the federal government for the issues that we care about if the environment is one of them. And so there's more emphasis on the state organizations, and there are 37 states, Connecticut being one, where we have effective lobbyist organizations where we catch the legislators, educate the legislators, and hopefully hold them accountable. But we were definitely tracking David's bill. When I was in the legislature, I fought as hard as I could against banning leg hold traps. Do you believe that Connecticut still uses leg hold traps? 70 countries around the world have abandoned them, even countries as remote from us as Madagascar, is calling them cruel. But we still have leg hold traps. So if you want to get on a particular issue that I just care about, and it's just abhorrent that Connecticut still allows trappers, and there are 370 of them who have influence well beyond their numbers in the use of leg hold traps to catch beaver and other animals, creatures in the forest in Connecticut. But I think you'd be probably, back to your question, you'd probably have to do a little research if animals is specifically your issue. But you're probably safe with any environmental group.
I'll keep names out, but there are some environmental groups that are more efficient or effective and less subject to special interests. And so I won't share names because the most important thing is that even though these environmental advocacy groups, let's say that they are taking the wrong approach or blocking legislation sometimes that you would think is a given because it's protecting the environment, we have to work all together. So I'll usually point out to them, but I'll keep the names out because it's important that they change and join the good fight, because it's important to be whole in what you represent. So if they're going to represent environmental advocacy, they have to do it all the way. And so I'm trying to encourage that, because some are less pure than others. But I'm very happy to be with those two organizations right here on stage, because I very much respect them. So.
We'll do one last question. Microphone's coming for you. There you go.
One of the troubling things to me, and I've been following Ms. Farrell for many years, we've met before, is that everything you're talking about is on an intellectual level that you people are all informed about, but the average citizen and young people, it's young people here that have to be educated. And I don't see how that is coming down, but I'm not in the public school system, so I don't know. The only way I see that young people form a friendship and fondness for animals is by going locally to the Beardsley Zoo. And you're now explaining, and I follow what you're saying, that these animals are all in captivity. And even with their nicer approach, because I've heard some of their theory about that they move animals to other zoos because they want to keep them. They have some certain philosophies there that, you know what I'm speaking of. I just don't see how this is filtering down, this education of this enormous problem to young people, which is the real place where this has to go. I appreciate it on your level, but those of us that are trying to deal with all this information that we're bombarded with every day, I don't even know where to begin with this subject, so big.
That is a great question. Here, let's pass it down.
I mean, the truth is there are lots of teachers that educate kids, and Friends of Animals hears from lots of classrooms. And classrooms of kids have gone to the Capitol in Hartford and testified against a bear hunt, or some such thing. I have one daughter. My daughter was raised in protests against wearing fur in New York City, variety of things. California yesterday banned the sale of retail fur, the first state in the country. And I hope New York City will be next. As parents, as guardians, as friends, we can all open our mouths and share what we know. And I appreciate that you find it intellectual, because for so many years, I think most of us were just written off as emotional. So thank you for that.
I was going to say, I think the youth is changing and is becoming more sensitive to animal rights issue. There's more connectivity between what is going on with climate change and the biodiversity. And so that's actually encouraging. The scariest thing as a legislator that I did was speak to 110 fourth graders. I wasn't sure I was going to come out of there alive, but I'd put orange shoes to make sure that they would look at the orange shoes and say, oh. They asked me one question, which was really amazing, and it was like, what is your favorite bills to introduce? I said, the ones that will protect animals. And guess what? The entire 110 kids stood up and were applauding and yelling, yeah, like somebody scored a goal. And I was shocked. I was like, wow, these kids are really thinking. And then you can see it in testimony. There's a lot more. I think there's high school kids that come and testify. There's these young activists that are popping left and right. And look, we have Senna in our state. There's Greta for the world. And we do have Senna in the state of Connecticut, who organized the Climate Youth March. I really have a strong, strong feeling that the youth is more and more sensitive to those issues. And it gives me great courage. And it's important for legislators to know we're actually going the right direction.
Let me also respond to your question. As a grandparent, as a parent, I think we're all endeavoring to create empathy with our children, not to overpower them with facts, but to get to their emotional component, because quite frankly, we react and behave more in response to emotions than we do intellect. And as a course of action, what I would do is encourage a child to get involved in a particular project. The subject is so broad and so overwhelming that it's very hard to focus on it and to grasp it. But if you can take on one issue and delve down in it, for example, another one that I'm involved in that's abhorrent is puppy mills. When you see pet stores, no reliable, ethical breeder is going to give their pets, the dogs that they breed, to a pet store. It just doesn't ever happen. So any dog or cat that you buy at a pet store has been born in a breeding factory. And the mothers are subjected to horrific conditions. Just a little exposure to the underpinnings, and you can go online and you can see what happens at these puppy mills and how these dogs, the bitches, are abused for their entire lives. Now you see the puppies, and I used to pick it outside of our local pet store. And I used to get castigated by customers who were walking in, oh, I bought my dog here, it's a wonderful dog, and so forth. Well, of course, you bought a wonderful dog. You bought the puppy. What you're not seeing is how the puppy was bred and the conditions under which its mother lived. And so if I were raising my daughter again, I might just expose her to that one industry, get her educated, let her see it, and from there we'll grow the empathy for caring and concern for animals in general. And again, I started, my issue is gratuitous cruelty, unnecessary pain and suffering inflicted on animals. There's a role for animals in the world, I understand that, but gratuitous cruelty has no place, I think, in human endeavors.
Very short, I'm sorry. Talking about pet shops, so we had the votes on the House floor. It never was called on the House floor. Then we tried to do it in my city, in Stamford, but DUAG received an email, which I have, and this was in the papers, saying, they're trying to shut down a pet shop, which is not true. We're just asking them to change their business plan, like other pet shops that sell strictly accessories and foods. But guess what happened? DUAG had his in-house counsel call our corporate counsel in Stamford, and I'm going to not comment on how they work over there in my city. But they said, the state may preempt municipal, and that shut down the legislative process in Stamford, which is outrageous. And so now we're going back with an additional tool to the state to fight that bill again.
Persistence.
So, overwhelmed with information, I'm sure, but I hope you gained some insight into how you can sort of proceed to take action on even our level locally. I want to thank you guys for joining us today and for the show, to the Connecticut Humanities, and also Ken, Priscilla, and David for being with us. Thank you so, so much. Give them a round of applause. And get home safely.